There is a sound the Amazon makes when nothing human is near, a low, continuous pressure of life, water moving through bark, the weight of leaves folding under rain, the breath of soil that has not been turned in centuries. Stand beneath this canopy and the world above disappears. The sky becomes a rumor. The ground softens underfoot. Everything here is vertical, layered, and alive. For most of modern history, this is what the Amazon was understood to be: wilderness, a place that predated human ambition and outlasted it. Explorers who entered the basin in the 16th and 17th centuries described an ocean of trees, immense, indifferent, and above all, empty. The few indigenous groups encountered were assumed to be small, scattered, and incapable of shaping the landscape around them. The forest, it was believed, had simply always been this way. As late as the 1950s, the dominant view among archaeologists was that the Amazon's thin, acidic soils could never have supported large populations. The argument was straightforward. Without fertile ground, there could be no surplus agriculture. Without surplus, no complex society. The rainforest was a kind of ceiling. The Upano Valley lies in the eastern foothills of the Ecuadorian Andes, pressed between two mountain ridges and watched over by Sangay, an active volcano. The valley runs roughly 100 kilometers long and 20 wide. From the air, it looks like every other stretch of lowland jungle in the western Amazon. A French archaeologist named Stephen Rostaing first walked into this valley in the mid-1990s. On foot, he identified several hundred earthen mounds. They were too regular to be natural, but the jungle made it impossible to see how they related to one another. Each mound was an isolated fact. The larger pattern was hidden. Rostaing spent years documenting what he could. Colleagues were skeptical. Some discouraged him from working in the Amazon at all. The prevailing consensus left little room. In 2015, LiDAR changed everything. It fires millions of laser pulses per second. The pulses pass through gaps in the canopy and return. From the reflections, a three-dimensional model of the ground surface is assembled. The trees effectively are removed. When Rostaing finally gained access to the processed data, years after the survey was flown, what he saw was not hundreds of mounds, it was thousands. More than 6,000 rectangular earthen platforms emerged from the scan, spread across 300 square kilometers of valley floor. They were grouped, 3 to 6 platforms arranged around open central plazas, forming residential clusters. Between them, agricultural plots stretched in orderly grids, and connecting them, running straight across ravines, climbing ridgelines, ignoring the natural contours of the land, were roads. Not trails, not footpaths, roads. Dug 2 to 3 meters into the earth, bordered by raised curbs, and ranging up to 15 meters wide on the major thoroughfares. One runs for 25 kilometers. The study was published in January of 2024. They identified 15 distinct settlement sites, 5 major centers and 10 smaller ones. Radiocarbon dating placed the occupation between approximately 500 BCE and 600 CE. More than 1,000 years of continuous habitation. This was not a village. At Kilometres, a single earthen platform stood 4.5 meters tall. The civic complex surrounding it covered 10 hectares. What the LiDAR revealed was evidence of people reshaping the forest systematically. This was planned. The Upano Valley receives rainfall measured not in centimeters, but in meters. Tropical storms arrive without warning and saturate the ground within minutes. Rivers swell. Low-lying earth turns to mud. The water table, already high, rises to the surface and stays there. Anything built at ground level in this landscape does not last. It sinks, it rots, it is absorbed. The people who lived here understood this. Every one of the more than 6,000 platforms identified in the Upano Valley was raised, not by accident, not by gradual accumulation. These were engineered foundations, rectangular volumes of compacted earth, lifted 2 to 3 meters above the valley floor, with flat tops wide enough to support timber-framed structures. Excavations at several sites uncovered post holes, hearths, grinding stones, and large ceramic vessels still containing traces of fermented maize. People lived on these platforms. They cooked. They stored food. They gathered. But the platforms did more than elevate daily life above the wet ground. They created a second landscape, a human layer sitting on top of the natural one. From below, the valley flooded seasonally. From above, life continued. The engineering was not monumental in the way a pyramid is monumental. It was practical. It was repeated thousands of times, and it worked for over 1,000 years. Then there were the roads. The 4 major road types identified in the survey each served a different purpose, but all shared one quality: deliberateness. The largest thoroughfares were dug 2 to 3 meters into the earth. Their profiles cut into a broad U shape, bordered on both sides by curbs. Some stretched more than 15 meters wide. These were not paths worn by footfall over time. They were constructed, carved downward into the terrain with intention. The longest confirmed road runs from Quilomopé in the north to Cunguins in the south, more than 25 kilometers of continuous straight construction. At each barrier, the road does not detour. It descends, crosses, and climbs again at right angles, as though the topography were an inconvenience to be overruled. A second major road exceeds 14 kilometers. Others branch and intersect, connecting the 5 major centers to one another and to the smaller surrounding sites. Consider what it takes to build a road like this. Not with stone. There is no accessible stone here. Not with metal tools. Earth. The material was earth. Every meter of road was dug by hand, shaped by hand, and maintained by hand in a climate that actively works to undo human labor. Roots push through compacted soil within a single growing season. Rain erodes exposed surfaces in days. Left unattended, a path does not simply become overgrown. It ceases to exist. That these roads persisted across centuries tells us something about the society that built them. Not just that they had the labor to construct, but that they had the organization to maintain. The same logic extended to the land itself. Between the residential clusters, LiDAR scans revealed hundreds of hectares of modified terrain, rectangular agricultural plots. These ditches did not simply mark property boundaries. They moved water. In a valley that floods, controlling where water goes is the difference between a harvest and a loss. The drainage grid channeled excess rainfall away. On the surrounding hillsides, the builders cut terraces into the slopes, stepping the earth upward. The volcanic soil, enriched by ash from Sangai's eruptions, was extraordinarily fertile. Analysis confirms the crops: maize, manioc, sweet potato, and beans. But fertility without management is chaos. Rain without drainage is destruction. What the Upano Valley builders achieved was not simply agriculture, it was hydrology. They carved the valley into a functioning system. Some causeways served a dual purpose: raised paths that stayed dry while the ditches beside them carried runoff away. Archaeologists have noted the resemblance to causeway systems in Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos, where pre-Columbian builders solved nearly identical problems. At certain settlement edges, the ditches deepen into something else: peripheral channels that appear to restrict access. Defensive or ceremonial? It remains an open question. Everything here was built in opposition to the environment's default state. The ground wants to flood. The forest wants to grow back. The rain wants to erase. And for more than a millennium, in a valley with no stone, no metal, and no dry season, someone held all of that at bay. Look at the arrangement long enough and something becomes clear. This was not improvised. The residential clusters follow a repeating structure: 3 to 6 platforms grouped around a central open space, oriented along shared axes, spaced at consistent intervals. Between the clusters, agricultural plots fill the intervening ground in orthogonal grids, their drainage ditches running parallel, their dimensions held within a narrow range. At Quilomopé, the largest civic complex, a single platform stretches 140 meters long. The proportions suggest a site designed to be approached, not stumbled upon. None of this happens without agreement. The question the layout raises is not architectural, it is social. A single family can build a mound, but a grid requires consensus. The archaeological record offers no written language, no monumental portraiture. What survives is ceramics and the infrastructure itself. Infrastructure is its own kind of text. A road that runs 25 kilometers in a straight line is a statement about priorities. It says that the connection between 2 places mattered enough to justify the labor of thousands. A drainage grid that spans hundreds of hectares says that agricultural output was managed collectively. A civic platform visible above the canopy says some spaces were meant to be seen. The earliest construction dates to 500 BCE. To place that in a wider frame, Rome was a republic of modest reach. Athens had not yet begun the Parthenon. In Mesoamerica, the comparison is closer. The Maya city of El Mirador was entering its period of greatest expansion. El Mirador and the Upano Valley were near contemporaries. By the time Upano reached its peak, China's Han Dynasty governed an empire. The Nazca were etching geoglyphs, the Moche were raising adobe pyramids, and in a valley most of the world would not learn about for 2,000 years, a population was maintaining an urban network with a density that rivaled Roman-era London. It is worth pausing on that comparison. The societies of the Mediterranean and East Asia left stone, metal, and writing. The Upano builders left earth. Compacted soil platforms in a climate that dissolves exposed surfaces. Timber structures in a forest that recycles wood. Ceramics told only a fraction of the story. What the geometry reveals is a society that arrived at its own standard of complexity. The grid was not borrowed. The road system has no known precedent. The integration of residential, agricultural, and ceremonial space into a single repeating pattern, garden urbanism, is original. It emerged from the conditions of the valley itself. The researchers identified this model, dispersed residential clusters integrated with managed agricultural land, as distinct from the compact cities of the Old World. There are no defensive walls encircling a center, no clear separation between urban core and rural hinterland. The entire valley is the settlement. Living space and growing space exist side by side, structured by the same grid, served by the same roads, drained by the same channels. For more than 1,000 years, this arrangement held. The grid was maintained, the roads were kept clear. Generation after generation lived within a pattern their ancestors established. Sangay has not been quiet in recorded memory. It is one of the most continuously active volcanoes on Earth, erupting almost without pause for centuries. For years, the leading explanation pointed to a single catastrophic eruption. Excavations uncovered thick layers of black volcanic ash, a thriving society, a violent eruption, silence. In August of 2025, a study published in Nature Communications offered a different account. A team analyzed a sediment core drawn from Lake Cormorant. The core preserved ecological history, pollen, charcoal, and microfossils layered in sequence, a record of what grew, what burned, and what was cultivated. The record showed maize cultivation beginning around 570 BCE. It tracked shifts in land management, slash and burn clearing, transitioning to more refined silviculture. The population adapted. But beginning around 250 CE, the record shifts again. Forest species begin to reassert themselves. The change is not sudden, it is gradual, a slow withdrawal of human pressure. The authors were explicit. There was no single volcanic event that ended this society. No ash layer thick enough. The end, such as it was, came slowly. What did end it remains uncertain. Volcanic activity may have contributed, not as a catastrophe, but as a cumulative burden. Repeated ashfalls disrupting crops, a slow degradation. Ecological pressure is another possibility. 1,000 years of intensive agriculture alter soil. If the population declined for any reason, the infrastructure would have degraded quickly. Rostaing suggested a structural explanation. A society this organized is hierarchical. When the system weakens, the structure does not gradually simplify, it comes apart. Some evidence suggests they migrated south, but the valley itself stood empty for 200 to 300 years. No one rebuilt. The grid was left to the rain. And the forest did return, steadily. Pioneer species colonized first. Roots pushed into the platforms and split them open from within. Within a few generations, the roads would have been indistinguishable from the surrounding ground. The light that once fell on plazas was absorbed by leaves. The vegetation today is not old growth. It has existed for roughly 200 years. These palms are successors, the latest generation of a forest cleared multiple times. The land remembers what was done to it, even when the canopy hides the evidence. The platforms were still there. The roads were still there. The grid was still there. Later cultures like the Huapala reoccupied some mounds. Each group inherited a landscape already shaped by the people who came before, whether they knew it or not. When Rostaing walked here in the 90s, he saw mounds but not the pattern. In 2015, LiDAR stripped the canopy away and the pattern emerged. The Amazon was not what we were told. It was never an empty wilderness. It was a landscape shaped by human hands and reclaimed by a forest patient enough to wait. We were not looking at a place without history. We were looking at a place whose history had grown over,